I had an incredible day at the wrecking yard pulling this 4.6 liter two valve engine out of this Mustang GT. And it was a big ordeal. I'll tell you what, you can see how crazy this got. I'm going to tell you the whole story, every detail. There was so much that happened in all of this to get this engine for my yellow Mustang GT project car. So I've been making some good progress on the zinc yellow Mustang GT, getting the car all back together, and I decided it's about time to start looking for a good 4.6 liter engine for the car. And I know that there's so many of them out there, and you can get them out of Crown Victorias, Grand Marquis, um, Lincoln Town Cars, sometimes Explorers, and even the Explorer with the V8. Some of them had the aluminum watt block, which some people think is kind of cool. The F-150, the modular 4.6 liter is very, very available. They're plentiful. There are a lot of them out there. So I started looking around because I wanted to make sure I got one. Now, you can have issues where you get one that has problems, and I wanted to just start looking. And as I started looking, I started to get a little bit less patient. I went into a wrecking yard and I asked them, and they said they had one out of a police car that had 120 something thousand miles on it, and they wanted $1,000 for it, just the engine. And so I was thinking, well, that's kind of a lot. That's a decent option if I have to. I've bought quite a few of them over the years, probably 10 or so, and I've got them ranging from $180 for a good running one, and all the way up to $1,000 I've paid for a good lower mileage one. And so I just wanted to see what was out there and just kind of see if I could get one from a wrecking yard or whatever. Sometimes it's better to buy the complete car, because when you do that, you get a lot of other things with it, especially if it's a Mustang. But the problem was, it's hard to find Mustangs around here, especially, that people are willing to sell the entire car for a decent price if it's wrecked. And for me, if I find a wrecked Mustang, I feel bad because I want to put it back together. I feel a little bit obligated, because I don't want to ruin a car that could be potentially good again. So I want to get one that's been wrecked really, really bad, and then I wouldn't feel bad about taking the engine. But I kind of knew that I'd be needing to get a Crown Vic engine or something like that, a town car engine, just because of how plentiful they are. And, they're usually not run as hard as a Mustang, so you usually have good luck with that. I've had 3 or 4 Vic engines I've put in a Mercury Grand Marquis engine, and they all seem to be pretty good engines. But anyway, I came across this one first, and I dealt with the guy for a couple weeks back and forth, and every time I was ready to come down and get it, he would change plans on me, and he had it in this wrecking yard. He had it pulled out of a Crown Vic, and I would ask for details, and he wouldn't get back to me. And then, the biggest problem was I wanted to come down on a Saturday. That's what worked best for me, and he'd say okay, and then Friday night late, he'd say, just come Monday. And I'm like, well, I can't come Monday. There's no way that I can do that. I got work. I have to get time off of work if I was going to do it that way. And you just totally threw the plans out from under me. And so, 2 or 3 weeks went by with this particular engine. I was trying to get it. And then he said, come this time or whatever. And I wanted just the engine, but he wanted to sell the engine and the transmission, which I didn't need, but I was willing to do it just to go ahead and finally get it. And then I started looking closer at the engine, and I was like, wait, this looks like there's this staining all over the transmission there that could be from a head gasket or something. I thought maybe it could be the condensation from the air conditioning dripping down there, because that's about where it would probably be, out of the firewall under the transmission. So it was possible, but I asked him, I said, is that coolant? Is there a blown head gasket? And he said, yeah, it looks like it has a bad head gasket. So I'm like, well, then why the heck are you not telling me this? I'm not going to come all the way down 2 hours to Vegas to get an engine that needs work done. A lot of times it's worth buying a complete engine if it has a blown head gasket, because it's not worth getting the heads machined and the gaskets and doing all that work, the cost involved is usually higher than it is just to buy another 4.6 out of a junkyard, especially with the time and effort and rebuilding everything and making sure you get it right. So I kept looking around and I found another engine, and this one was about 3.5 hours away, so that would be a 7-hour trip. And I was just gonna go down and get it, but of course it turned into a couple weeks in a row of the guy not getting back to me, and then it was too late by the time he'd get back to me. And then he said he broke the timing cover on it when he got it out of the car, and that I'd have to replace that as well, which I do have extra 2-valve timing covers, but it was just kind of annoying. And he was just kind of hard to deal with, wouldn't get back to me, and then I'd ask him for details, and then I'd tell him I'd like to travel tomorrow morning. Can you please tell me? And then later he'd say, "Are you coming?" And I said, "No, you didn't tell me certain details about it." And so I got to looking at it, and he only had these two pictures of it, and I was like, I don't like playing 20 questions trying to figure out all these things about it. And so over the time it took to actually get the details, I found out that it was probably out of a higher mileage police car, and that the it looked like on the back of it there was coolant all over right here on the transmission. It was crustifying back there, possibly from a blown head gasket, but he wasn't giving me any details. It was just yes or no answers, and it was really hard to deal with him. And so I basically got to the point where I didn't want to risk it going down there for that. And so I found this other one, which was out of a Lincoln Town car. It was out of an '02, so the same engine, same year as a Mustang GT that I have for my '02 zinc yellow car. And this looked like a pretty nice engine, but then he was saying that um, after I asked him a million questions, I got to find out that this engine's been sitting outside and been rained on, didn't even have a tarp on it. It's been out for 2 years like this. And so that kind of worried me. It could be a good engine. I was kind of excited about it because a town car probably wasn't as beat up or run hard like a police car would be, or a Mustang. And so I was hopeful for it, but the guy just wouldn't get back to me. He said he'd take off a valve cover and look it over, and he said he'd bring a borescope home from work and put it in there and look around, and he just never did any of those things, and it was just hard to deal with him. And like weeks would go by, and it would bother me because it's like I would wait all week and be excited to go down there, and then he wouldn't get back to me, and then I couldn't go. And so it kind of ruined my plans. I'd wake up on Saturday morning and be excited to go down there, but then he wouldn't answer me or give me an address or anything, and so I'd waste the whole day. And so it really started to get annoying. And so knowing that the engine sat outside in the rain for 2 years means there's a possibility that the piston rings were rusting to the cylinder walls, maybe got water in it. I mean, it's a sealed engine, so it might have been okay, but I didn't really know. And so that was really difficult to have to decide whether I wanted that one or not, because it could be a good engine and I might have been all right with it. But the thing is, if I get one of these non-Mustang engines, I would need the exhaust manifolds. I already got an intake manifold and the plenum and things in the intake, but there are things like the oil filter adapter housing that's specific to the Mustang, and the dipstick tube, and just things like that that I would have to get from the wrecking yard. So if I was going to go all the way down there, I wanted to go down and get the engine and have enough time to go to the pick apart and get those parts off of a Mustang, which could have been difficult. Now I did have a friend who said he'd give me exhaust manifolds here in town, so that was really nice of him. And so it wouldn't have been too bad at that point, and I was willing to do it, but it just kept falling through, and they wouldn't get back to me. And he'd say, "Hey, sorry." He'd finally answer and say, "Sorry, this weekend's not good for me." So, and I'm just like, man, I'm kind of tired of playing games with all these people. And so I was also helping my brother a lot on a couple weeks in a row working on his T56. And so it would make it so that I didn't have the availability to go down and get the engines that I wanted. But he was nice enough to tell me that I could use his truck and go down and get an engine if I needed to. So that was really nice of him to do that for me. And so I was looking around, and it was about 11 o'clock at night on a Friday night, and I saw that there was this listing here for a 2002 Mustang GT convertible, and it was at the pick-a-part in Las Vegas, and it looked like it had front-end damage, but I could tell that the car seemed like it was okay before the accident, and so it probably had a running engine in it. Now, I just found these pictures of this car. So these are all the pictures of the car when it went to the auction before it went to pick apart. So it's kind of cool to see all this, and you can see the damage. It wasn't too bad. It was actually not as bad as my silver GT that I fixed, or the yellow one I'm fixing now, and it looked like a nice car. So I got to looking through these pictures, and I didn't have all these. I had just that first one of the car, and I got excited about it. And I told my brother, hey, there's a Mustang in the pick-apart, and it looks like the engine's probably good. I really want to go down and get it. I would have everything I needed, exhaust manifolds, oil pan, all that stuff, plus the running engine. And they charge about $350 for the engine. So, I mean, yeah, I got to pull it out myself, but this looked like a pretty good thing, so I was kind of excited about it. And so seeing the car in this condition, I could assume that the car was running and driving when it was in an accident and that it was probably okay. And so I really got excited, and I was talking to my brother about it, and I wanted him to come help me, but he just couldn't do it. He was actually down in Las Vegas, but he was down there with his family, and it was really hard for them, and he didn't really want to stay with me down there and work on the car while his family drove home. And so, that's fine, that's understandable, but it was one of those things where I was really tired because I had actually been helping him all day on Saturday working on his T56, and I'd worked all day too, so I was really tired and kind of had a little bit of a headache, and so I was kind of hopeful about it and excited, but I was also kind of feeling really tired and thinking, I don't know if I should go down there. I'd have to get up early, and I'd be on a very tight time limit because they close at 4:30 p.m. every day. They're open 7 days a week, but they close a little earlier than you would think they'd be open just so they can do that. And so it was like, man, I don't know if I should do this. I'm kind of tired, kind of a little bit of a headache. I'd have to get a good night rest and see how I felt in the morning. And the plans with my brother weren't really firm. He wasn't going to be able to help me, and so I was going to have to do it all alone. But I was very determined, and I thought, man, if I don't go do this, I'm probably going to be upset with myself. I'm probably going to kick myself for not doing it. Because I knew I'd probably wake up on Saturday, I'd be doing things around the house, I'd be out in the garage, and I'd be like, man, I should have just gone down. I had all day to do this. I should have just done it. So I went to bed, and I didn't set an alarm, which was probably a mistake. I was thinking, well, if I'm going to do this, I should probably go get my brother's truck. I should put the engine hoist in the back because I'm going to have to bring my own engine hoist, get all the tools, get everything ready so I can just go first thing in the morning. But I still wasn't even sure if I was going to go. But I woke up at 8:30 in the morning, and I felt really good. And I thought, okay, are you going to do this? You should probably just go do it. And it was 7:30 Vegas time. They're an hour behind. So that was working in my favor. But I thought, okay, I'm going to go do all this. And I got dressed, and I got on my little boy's bike because I just wanted to get a little bike and drive 2 blocks down to where my brother lives and then get his truck and drive it back here so I could get my engine hoist and stuff. And I got on his bike, and I was pedaling, and I wasn't even thinking very clearly. I'd just woken up. I was kind of in a rush now trying to do this and decide if I was still even going to go through with it. And I could have just taken my bike, which was on the side of the house. I should have just done that. But I was like pedaling like a little clown on a clown bike on my little boy's bike just because it was right there on the porch, and I grabbed it and went. And as I was crouched over on it, my phone fell out of my pocket and rolled down the sidewalk. Luckily, the case protected it. And I was like, oh, I almost destroyed my phone. I'm like, you got to be careful. Take a little bit more caution and don't rush it too bad. Let's go ahead and go do this. So I was Quickly getting to my brother's house, I got into his garage and I called him and said, "Look, I know you don't like me borrowing your really nice tools, but I could really use your Sawzall with the battery, because if I can cut the front off of this Mustang, that would make it so that I could just cut the front of it off like my other Mustang was." Like in this picture, you can see when I did my silver Mustang that was wrecked, I cut the whole front of it off and I put the front of another Mustang on there. But when it was like this, it was so easy to get to everything. And I thought I could take my own engine hoist, I could hook it right up to the engine, drop the transmission mount and the engine, uh, motor mounts, and I could lift the engine and just pull it straight forward out of the car. And that would be really easy because at the wrecking yard, you could do whatever you want to the cars. You can mangle them and cut them up. I mean, it's not nice to do that, but people do that just to get the part they want. They'll break anything. And so I thought in this case, it'd be worth it for me. The front of that Mustang was already gone and crashed anyway. So all I could do is just cut the front of this car off, and then I could pull the engine out, and that would be a lot easier than trying to drop the subframe or pull it out the top. So that was my plan. So I called him and he was really nice. He was in the hotel. He went out into the hallway to talk to me and he's like, "Yeah, you can borrow my Sawzall and my Impact. That's fine." And he told me which batteries to take. He has a whole bunch of DeWalt batteries and stuff. So I got the batteries he told me to take, and I got the Sawzall and a bunch of blades, and I got his truck and I took it to my house. And once I got to my house, I had to take out his toolbox that was in the back of the truck. It's like one of those big metal toolboxes by the cab, and make room for everything. And I had to make sure I got everything. I needed my toolkit, which I always take to the wrecking yard. I have two toolkits. One's like a 200 and something piece Craftsman set, and I've put some other things in there. And the other one's like a tackle box that has pliers and wire cutters and things that I need like that, aviation tin snips, all the good stuff like that for cutting wires or harnesses or transmission lines if I have to and stuff. So I got all that. I got a breaker bar. I got my jack stands. I got my actual floor jack. I got just everything that I could think of, a little mini sledgehammer. And I'm like, okay, I think I have everything I need. I had to get the engine hoist cylinder. I bought a brand new one when I pulled the engine out of one of my other Mustang GTs. And so I kept it in the garage so it wouldn't bake in the sun or be out in the elements. And then I had to get my engine hoist out of the shed. And so that was buried in there. And I backed the truck up to the shed and I pulled everything out. And I put the engine hoist up into the back of the truck by myself, which was pretty heavy. And I put a spare tire in there so I could put the engine on a spare tire when I got it. And my brother had tie-down straps in the truck, so it was ready to go. And so I grabbed a donut that I had in the kitchen and I hit the road. And right when I was leaving, my wife said, "Hey, do you have water?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I always forget water." And I've been good about bringing it to the wrecking yard lately because there was a time I really, really needed it and I was about to die. It was like 110 degrees and man, it was hot. But um, I have been good about bringing water, but for whatever reason, I totally forgot it this time. So I grabbed a gallon jug of water that I had in the garage and I went. And so I hit the road and I was just taking it easy, getting down there on time. And I wasn't sure how this was going to be. The whole drive down there, I was thinking, okay, should you be doing this? This is a big deal. You're doing this by yourself. I had called a couple friends, but they couldn't come. And I thought, man, what if you get to the point where you get this engine out or almost all the way out and then the wrecking yard closes? You're going to have to leave it there. And that's going to be a mess. And be careful, don't hurt yourself, make sure to drink the water and everything. And the whole drive down there I was thinking, okay, what am I going to do? Am I going to drop the subframe so I could get to the back of the transmission bolts and pull the trans off? Do I have to take the torque converter bolts off as well? I couldn't remember if I could just pull the transmission away from the engine or if I had to actually get the torque converter bolts off first. That was going through my mind. And I just had all these things I was thinking of the whole drive down there of my order of operations, how to do it. I need to be quick, use the Sawzall to cut the front of the car off. If I could do all that right, can I do it before they close? And so I was on a time crunch, and I was kind of kicking myself because I was like, man, I should have loaded everything up last night. I should have set an alarm at least and gotten up early so that I could have been there right when they opened and, everything. But I got to pick apart and I drove through the parking lot and there was nowhere to park. I wasted 10 minutes just looking for a parking spot, back and forth and back and forth, and everywhere else around had no parking signs everywhere. And I finally did find a place where other people were parking as well and walking, and it was like quarter mile distance. like it was in a parking lot nearby, but I was gonna have to get the engine hoist out, and I was gonna have to push that with my tools and everything, like basically a quarter mile by the time I went all the way over to the pick apart, in through, and then back to where the Mustangs were. It was a real big deal, and I thought to myself, okay, do you run in there first with a couple tools, make sure the car's there, make sure the engine's okay, pull a spark plug, check the oil, make sure it's good, and then go back and get your tools like the hoist and everything? And I thought, no, because that's just going to waste 10 or 20 minutes of going in and then coming back out, and then getting everything and going back in. And so I thought, just do it, go for it, get all your tools together, get through the door and get to the car. And if it's not there, then that's just gonna be too bad. And maybe there's a Crown Vic in there you can find an engine out of, or maybe you can go across town to the other guy with the town car engine and try to get that one, because I did bring cash with me so I could buy that engine if all else failed. And there was even another guy with a Crown Vic selling the car, and he was like, parting out Crown Vic, runs good, whatever. And I asked him, and he said he wanted 500 for the engine. I said, that's pretty good. And I said, is it in the car? No. Or yes. I was like, yes and no questions is all he was giving me. But I had to ask him, is the engine in the car? Yes. Does it run? No. Did it run? Yes. Like, what the heck, man? Just tell me. Like, how much? 500. Okay, so are you going to get the engine out? I'll come get it. He said, no, if you want me to get it out, it's 900. And I'm like, well, that's what a wrecking yard charged me anyway, And he's like, well, you come get it out then. And I'm like, well, why would I pull it myself for that price when I could do it at Pick Apart cheaper? So anyway, that was a mess. So anyway, I decided to go ahead, pull out the engine hoist, and people were watching me do this, and I probably looked crazy. And so I got everything out, and you can see I had my engine hoist, I had my floor jack on the base of it, bungeed around there, I had my tackle box one, I had the big duffel bag full of tools, I had the jack stands under there too, I had everything. And as I pushed this thing, it only wanted to go sideways, and then it would catch, and the casters weren't moving very well. I hadn't used it for a while. I probably should have put some WD-40 on them, but I, didn't even think I was going to be doing this just like that. I didn't have time to prepare like I should have, but I had to put that red cylinder on in the parking lot, make sure it was bolted up there and ready to go. And I pushed this thing, and I was like football pushing, like when you practice for football and you're pushing against somebody and trying to make some ground. I mean, this thing was heavy, and I was pushing it as hard as I could. It was going sideways everywhere. People were getting out of my way. It was making a ton of noise. It was, dragging rocks and stuff on the cement, putting lines in the cement, scratching and stuff. And I was just forcing this thing all the way to the entrance. And then I got in, I paid my $1 they make you pay just to enter, and then I pushed this thing all the way over till I found the Mustangs. And I went halfway down the aisle, and then I realized that the Mustang was on the end of the aisle, but it was on the other side. So I had to go all the way back to where the Mustang started, and then back over, and then up and around and everything. And it just was a nightmare. It took forever. But anyway, I finally made it there to the car, and I was looking over the car and I was still trying to think, okay, you know, make sure you look it over before you just start going at it, and I looked as much as I could, and I didn't notice till later, but the radiator was missing, but I think that's because somebody actually got it. So I don't know if they knew. It looked like there was a little puddle under it at the wrecking yard, like the other place where it went to auction. So maybe the radiator was cracked and they didn't know it, but somebody had gotten the radiator out of it. So that made me think that, okay, the car might not have been in too bad of an accident. Maybe it still had coolant and stuff in it. And so the first thing I did was I grabbed the oil filter. I unscrewed the oil filter and I dumped it out, and I could see the oil looked clean. It looked good. So I thought, okay, that's good news. And the coolant looked really good. And, the hoses were still attached, but they were kind of crunched, and I had to cut through one of the hoses, and fresh coolant came out, looked good. So I was pretty sure that the car didn't have a head gasket issue or anything like that because the fluids looked good. I was pretty relieved when I got there and I was looking over the car, and everything looked pretty good. Like I said, the accident damage wasn't even as bad as my other cars were, and the engine was complete and it was there. The dipstick was missing, and the radiator and the air intake, but I think the intake was actually sitting over on the ground nearby. So it looks like everything was there. There were a couple other 4.6 Vicks and stuff there, and people had taken valve covers off and intake manifolds off, and so you have no idea what's like missing or if they dropped anything down in the engine. And so this engine was still complete, and I had gotten to it just in time. And so I got under the car and I started looking around at what I needed to do first. I wasn't sure if I wanted to drop the drive shaft or if I wanted to go for the motor mounts, the engine mounts, the K-member bolts or whatever. And the exhaust was cut off. They cut the catalytic converters out of the car's first thing because those are worth a lot of money. And so the exhaust was cut off, which was nice because it was cut off at the manifolds, but where the cat back was, where they cut it, it had been bent down like 90 degrees. So every time I tried to crawl under the car, it would like catch and scratch my shirt and like snag on my shirt. So it was really hard. I had to like crawl in between the wheel and the door there, and then or going through the front or whatever. It was just really hard to move around underneath the car because of how they had cut the exhaust. And so the convertible Mustangs actually have an extra brace that connects the body there behind the wheels to the K-member, which is the cradle, everything that holds the wheels and what the engine sits on. And so it had that convertible brace there, and I thought, actually, that'd be kind of cool if I got that, because my yellow car, having the whole front of it put on and welded in, would actually be nice to have that convertible brace to tie the body to the K-member and have a little extra support there. So I thought, that's cool. I wanted one of those anyway. I had it on my list of notes on my phone of things I wanted to get while I was at Pick Apart, because you get there and you start looking at cars and you start to forget the things that you needed because you're overwhelmed by all the cars and parts and things you're looking at, and it's easy to forget that stuff. So I actually did want one of those, and I was excited that I could get the one off this car, and so I got my big breaker bar and my tools out, and I started to unbolt that bar, and I got most of the bolts loose, and then two of them on each side were completely frozen, and I had the breaker bar on that full might. I'm sore right now like crazy, and my chest muscles, everything, from trying to break those loose, and then they were just rounding off. And so I was really in trouble at that point because I needed to get that bar out of the way so I could drop the K-member just enough to get to the transmission bolts and everything. And so that really bothered me because now I was in trouble. So I took the Sawzall that my brother let me borrow, and I cut through the brace. And that really was hard because I wanted to keep the brace, but at this point I was on a time crunch, so I had to do this. And so I cut through one side, it went pretty clean, and then the other side I was cutting through, and the Sawzall started to slow down. And I let off because I didn't want to burn it up or anything. I let off and I gave it a couple zaps, and I noticed that the battery was dying on the Sawzall. And it wasn't going to make it all the way through the second bar that I needed to cut through. And so luckily I had the impact gun and it had a battery. So I took the battery off that one and put it on, and it made it all the way through the rest of the bar. And then I took the front fender off the car and I started to cut the front of the car off, and then the battery died on the Sawzall again. So both batteries were dead, and now I was dead in the water. I was like, oh great, this was my plan. I was going to cut the whole front of the car off, and now I'm sunk. I'm here. I'm dedicated. I have all my tools here. Just pushing everything through here was really difficult. My heart was pounding. I was thirsty. I drank my water. Luckily, I brought it with me. And now I was like dead in the water, and I'm alone, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to get the engine out of this car. And so I thought, okay, well, the next thing I'm going to have to do is just drop the whole K-member, the whole cradle with the engine on it and the transmission, and just drop it out the bottom, and then try to lift the car with my engine hoist and lift it up and get it high enough that I can use my floor jack to pull the drivetrain out from under the car with the floor jack. So I got under there, and I'm trying to do all these things and get the K-member bolts, and they were really tight, but I did get all of them loose. And I was realizing that I needed to get the drive shaft off, and I was getting to certain points where I really needed to get the drive shaft off, and so I realized there's no key, and this was an automatic car. So I was going to have to find a way to rotate the drive shaft to get to the top bolts. There's 4 bolts on the back of the drive shaft where it connects to the axle. And so I could get the bottom 2 and everything was locked up, but I couldn't get to the top ones. And so I looked over and I could see the transmission there. And so I took my aviation snips and I just cut the cable to the transmission. And then by hand, I could cycle it into neutral and then rotate the drive shaft and then cycle it back into park. And then I was able to break the other ones loose, drop the drive shaft and pull it out. And then the engine and transmission were now free of the drive shaft, so I could get to that point. So then I started hoisting up the front of the car. And so unfortunately, I was in such a time crunch that I got to the point where I just had to start cutting power steering lines and engine harnesses and things, which I already have for my other cars. I already bought all those pieces. And so I'm okay to cut them. I didn't need them, but I felt bad doing so, especially the engine harness. But it was kind of hanging by the throttle cable and all those things. And I just had to go start cutting those things. It was actually a lot harder to cut through them for some reason. But I did that, and I was cutting things loose, and I got to the point where the K-member and the engine was all dropped, and the car was hoisted up in the air. You can see that the wheels were still attached to everything because they had locking lug nuts, so that made it even more difficult to get to everything while I was underneath the car. I couldn't take the wheels off, but I had the drivetrain basically dropped and the engine mounts were unbolted and everything, and the car was just hanging there. And so I was at the point where I didn't really know what to do next. I was trying to figure it out, and luckily, a nice guy and his son were walking by. So many other people walked by and just looked at me, but this guy walked by and he said, "Wow, you look like you almost have it. You're doing really good." And I got to talking to him real quick, and he's like, "Hey, do you need help?" And I just thought, oh man, I don't like asking for help. Like I know that you're here to get your own things and everybody's busy, but I could really use some help just getting the engine off of the K-member and out to the open where I could take the transmission off and all that stuff. And he was really cool. He's like, "Oh yeah, man, I'm totally down to help. Let's go get one of those A-frame things, and then we can lift the car even higher, and then you can use your hoist to pull the drivetrain out." And so you can see we got that car jacked up high enough that we could pull everything out. And it was kind of a struggle because the K-member was on the legs of the engine hoist. And so we could lift the engine, but then we had the weight of the K-member and the wheels and everything, so we couldn't pull it all out. And we really had to bear wrestle that K-member with the wheels on it and everything to get it off and rolled out of the way so we could pull the engine out. And so we were able to do that. And that was so much help. That's what I needed the most to get this engine out from that car. And so once I was able to get the engine and the transmission onto a wheel and lower it down and take the transmission off, that worked. I took off all the transmission bolts, and I did pull the transmission away, leaving the torque converter on the back of the engine. So that was nice to do that. I took the starter out and stuff, and Um, I got everything the way I needed to, and I was now thinking, okay, I need to get the engine to the front. I need to get my hoist to the front. I was going to try to just drag the hoist with the engine dangling on it, but it would be really hard to move it a quarter mile like that, just pushing and shoving and everything. And the casters weren't working very well, and so it was going to be a little more difficult. And so I had to leave everything there, and I took some tools with me because I was trying to avoid as many trips to the front as I could, and I didn't want to leave my tools because people will steal them. So I grabbed my tools, my boxes and stuff, and the things that I thought I could take, and I took them all the way to the front. And the friend there who had helped me said, "Hey, you can ask them. I think sometimes they'll take an engine to the front for you, with a forklift or something." So I took my tools, I took everything, and I carried it all to the front. And I was like dying, like I was so beat, and I was like heart pounding and hot and everything. And I got to the front and I put my tools by the front where people probably wouldn't steal them because there's other people watching. And I asked about the forklift, and he said, "No, absolutely not. You are on your own. If you want anything in that wrecking yard, you have to get it yourself, and you bring it to the front yourself, and you load it yourself." And I'm like, okay, that's fine, understandable, but I'm going to have to figure this out. And so they had like a wheelbarrow that they make. It's like a flatbed, and it has actual car wheels on it. But it's kind of like a hand cart, so you'd have to like put the engine on it and lift it and push it, and it's like 400 pounds or something like that. And I didn't think I could do that, especially because I didn't want to hurt my back and all that stuff after working all this. It was so much, and I was already so sore and tired. And I had taken it all the way back there, and I looked it over. I thought, is there a way I could like put the engine on it and then push both of them at the same time? It's just like, no. But I did see a guy put an engine in a shopping cart and take it out once when I was there with my friend. And so I thought that's probably the best way, because you have four wheels and all you got to do is push it. And there are shopping carts there that are broken from people who trying to put stuff too heavy in them, and they break the welds and stuff. So I wasn't sure if it was going to work, but I thought, okay, it's worth a try. Let's see if I can do this. And so I went to lift the engine, and I realized that my breaker bar that I was using to pump the jack with, and my pliers that I was using to twist and release the pressure on the bottle jack, were up at the front now. So I had to make a trip all the way back to the front to go get my tools that I had taken up there because I needed them to operate the jack. And so I did that, and I remembered to bring my cutters too, because the engine and transmission were separated, but the transmission lines were still connected to the engine. They were bolted to the side of the engine, and I didn't have my tools anyway to unbolt them. So I had to get my cutters and cut those transmission lines for the automatic, and then I could separate the two and everything. And man, it was just a nightmare. I had to make 2 extra trips back, and I was down to about an hour to spare at this point. I had an hour before they closed, and I was just making it. I'm like, okay, I think I'm gonna make it. And I did take the serpentine belt off and rotate the engine with the breaker bar just to make sure everything was good before I started this too. I kind of forgot that detail. But anyway, I was able to get the engine in a shopping cart, and then I pushed it to the front. And there is kind of a little bit of a grade, so I had to get a run on it because I didn't want to get to the point where it was too heavy and I was going uphill. And so I was just pushing this thing, and I shoved that engine in that shopping cart all the way to the front and parked it there and said, okay, I'll be right back. I have to go get my jack. So I went back and I got my hoist and the rest of the tools, my jack stands and stuff. And I yanked that and pushed it all the way to the front. And I got everything where I could pay for it. And then I was able to do a couple things I need in the wrecking yard too. Got a couple extra little things like light bulbs. I did get the taillights out of this car. I wish I could have got the rear bumper and the catback exhaust, even though it was stock. There's some things I still wanted. I would have taken the whole solid axle. I just didn't have the time to get all those things. And so I at least got a bunch of things, and I got to the point where I could load up the engine. So luckily they had this little A-frame hoist out there. I put the shopping cart underneath, pulled the engine up, and then I was able to back the truck into it and drop the engine on the spare tire I had brought, and then I ratchet strapped everything down. And so it was smooth sailing all the way home. I couldn't believe what I had just done. I was just like in shock that I could do all that by myself. I did have the help from those two people. I'm very grateful for them. If they ever watch this video, I thank you guys. You know, please comment. I went inside to a Wendy's and I washed my hands several times, just enough to be able to eat. And you know, it was a beautiful place, and I envision one day hopefully bringing that GT here with this engine that's in the back of the truck. I would like that engine in this truck to drive me here in that GT one day. That's my goal. That's something that I would like to do. It's a beautiful place, brand new rest stop area here on the highway. So I did take a back road. My brother told me that their freeway was backed up and I should probably take a back way home, and he told me about that, so that was nice of him to do that for me. And so I tried to enjoy a little bit of a scenic drive home, and at this point I could care less how long it took me to get home because I had the engine. I accomplished my goal. I did the impossible. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to even do this, and I did it. So the drive home was beautiful and it was nice, even though I was still pretty hungry even after eating and stuff. I mean, it was just a real brutal day. And, you know, I left at like, you know, 9:30 in the morning, and I got home at like 6 o'clock at night. So it was just like several hours of straight up work, but it was awesome, and I was pretty excited about it. So I got home, and I decided to go ahead and make some room in the garage for the engine, and so we'll get to that part next. But anyway, that's the update for the Zinc Yellow GT. I did get an engine. Hopefully it's good. I mean, there's no guarantee this runs, but you know, I think it's going to be okay. And I'll show you some things I looked over the engine and noticed about it that I like. But anyway, that is the crazy story. So if you stayed through all the way to the end, I hope you enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty crazy, and there were just so many things that I was like getting hung up on and trying to figure out, like getting the drive shaft off, and like how am I going to get the engine to the front, and just there's just so many little things that were just like, you know, pitfalls, like on Apollo 13 when they say we just lost the moon, you know, when they had the problem. And that's what I thought when the Sawzall quit. I thought, oh no, mission is aborted, you know, like we ruined the mission, Sawzall's dead. That just totally put me dead in the water, but I figured out a way around it. And you know, I was very grateful that my brother lent me the tools, because if I hadn't had the Sawzall to at least cut through that convertible brace on the bottom, then I don't know if I could have done it. So at least I did have it for that, even though I didn't have it for everything else I wanted to, and it would have been a little easier. But anyway, it all worked out pretty well, and looks pretty good. I've turned the engine over, seems pretty good, and I'll make more videos on that as we go. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for more of this project and more Mustang content.